Okay, we have another astrology video today. This astrology video is the fourth house series. We're starting the fourth house today. So the fourth house has to do with your childhood, your upbringing, um, strong connection to your roots, support system, and your, you know, inner power, emotional strength, where that comes from, what that looks like. And like that's the fourth house, right? But the sun is your ego, your consciousness, what people kind of see you like. So basically you can come off as a person who is very emotional at times, or sensitive is like more the right word, as this is the sun sign. So you can come off as sensitive towards certain subjects, like leaning towards more your you know past and shit. If you feel like people are like attacking you for like your past and shit, you can get emotionally triggered, or maybe not emotionally triggered, but like you're just sensitive to that type of shit. And you might not, like people who make light of that or try to like spin shit other ways, because they didn't, go through that, you know. And like it's not like you're a person who doesn't want connection, because you like to, you would like to, you like your family, or you want to have a family of your own. But sometimes you're in that period where it's just not there. You don't have the right things to like make that happen. Like if you're trying to build your own family, and if you're part of your family already, that shit might be chaotic. You might have had one parent, that type of shit. You might have had no parents at all. You might have had a family that brought you in. Everybody's past is different. I don't know, and I don't like, personally, I don't care. I understand the past makes you, but it's like what you do with that past and like moving forward. That's what the Green Angel knows. I'm not one to judge. You know, it's like after you became an adult, what did you do with that? And that's like the stuff that you have to look at. But anyways, we got Sun in the fourth house for Aries. So Sun in the fourth house for Aries. If you are Aries Sun in the fourth house, you care about your family, right? But shit was probably chaotic growing up. You saw things differently than your parents. They wanted you to do this, but you like lashed out at them like, no, I want to do this, because like you see a way for yourself to do that. They were probably like overly protective, but you were like, no, I can do this, mom. I can do this, dad. You don't need like, hold me down like that. You don't need to like do that. You know, I can, you have a sense of like independence. You have a sense of, purpose that you see for yourself. They might not have seen it. And maybe they encouraged it. I don't know. Your family, is different, but you moving forward, you like to, be that leader too. So like when you create your own family, if that's what you want to do, and it ain't always like that, but sometimes you do. You like to be that authority, and like you're also a bit overly protective, you know, but you're also, you understand that, need to like, you know, find shit by yourself and like, go out and your kid will have to go out and live their own life, and you'll be fine with that. Like you'll still care about them, but you like, they have to like, flap their own wings and get the fuck on. Not out of like any like, because you've already done what you had to do, you know. And then you as the kid in the house, right? You were always like that, but your family might have been like, no, little, so and so, don't do this, because if you do this, you could get hurt. You could do this. You could do that. You could, But now that you, by yourself, doing your thing, and you might not have liked your parents, but you have friends, and you have friends that like he calls like that kind of shit, and like they see you as like a leader and all that other stuff, but like certain things could trigger you. You come across the person who's like kind of like you feel as though it's trying to like restrict you. You ain't gonna like that because that reminds you of your mom and dad and shit, and you're like, what the fuck? This person's trying to like hold me back from what I'm trying to do. I can't be this way. That makes no sense. um you know so you can see a lot of challenges in your way still, when it triggers your past and shit. That's what I mean. But if it don't, and you like, because like you seek newness as a fire sign, right? So you, as long as it's something new and it's like nothing like that you feel as like, okay, you felt a negative thing in the past, like somebody was like holding you back, you couldn't do much but you wanted to do shit but your parents wouldn't let you, and it gives that energy off. You're like, fuck that, this person's like not up my alley, I don't like them at all. And like that's something you gotta like work through in your life. But this next person, this is Sun in the fourth house, Taurus. I have this placement. So in this placement, you know you are sensitive, to certain things, not everything, you know but certain things do tick you off, you know but you don't lash out like that. You go and you dismiss shit, like basically you don't give attention to it no more. You rather like not even do that shit. It is not who you are. You like to like just cut them off then. Because like you're also a person, right? So you were a person that it was might have been hard for like people to get you to do stuff, you know certain times. Like you liked what you liked, but then like when it came time for you to like do what other people wanted you to do, it was like kind of tough, and then people didn't like you for that. It was a hard upbringing for like both people involved. You were kind of the hard-headed kid, but like also you weren't like, you also gave your parents some type of you know love and strength in a way. You gave strength to your parent because your parent, you were always there, and you might have been chaotic and shit, but like they became better parents because they had to like learn how to hone you in, like reel you in, and tell you, no, don't do this, don't do that, or maybe not that, but you have to do more. No, you can't not do this. You have to do this. You can't. You have to do this. You can't not do this. You can't be lazy. That's not a good fucking trait. People don't like shit like that. And like you had that parent that kicked you in your ass, or both parents who did that. You know. So like you then build some type of strength yourself, to do shit that you don't want to do, and just get shit done. you know you, when you're on your own, you don't like people who are like, man, out of order sometimes. Like it, like if they come up to you acting like they can do whatever the fuck they want, you don't like that. you know because you had to go through, and you didn't do that. See, you got discipline growing up. Still, you got shit taken from you that you liked, and then you see these people and you're like, they're kind of ungrateful. They don't understand, what it means to like have, that type of thing. They just, run their mouths and like they don't even know like what. But you're also sensitive too, so like certain things tick you off. Sometimes it's not even that big of a deal or whatever, right? But I'd say, because I have displacement too. Um, just like be you, and like don't do that shit so much. You know when to pick your battles and other things, right? When to cut people off too. You might have had to cut your own family off. You might have had to and when you and you also like to like want to build your own, family. If you want to do that, it also takes time, but you have the patience, to like do that now. Sometimes you might stay, in a situation longer than you should, because it reminds you of like that comfortable side of your past. It like people that come into your life when you're by yourself remind you of that, and then you might overstay, but you know when to go. I know, you'll know when to like, but like you find strength in being alone though too, in that like you are finding who you are when nobody else is around, and then like you can better, find the right people that are for you after you've gone through that period of like isolation. And you can do that because, well, you had to like, not a I don't want to say it's always a strong upbringing, but you were a person who, man, could just like endure. But it's still a challenge because certain things tick you off, and then like you might leave a place because one person ticked you off, but maybe that place wasn't that bad. It was just said person, fucked your time up there, so you don't want to be there no more. Um, but you like to like have like people who like loyalty is a thing too. You like people who are loyal. You don't like people who are disloyal. That shit ticks you off too. With this person, you don't like that, and you can like sense that shit. It's like something that by the way they talk, by the way they do shit. If they're for you or not. Um, but the next person is Gemini Sun in the fourth house. Gemini Sun in the fourth house. This person was, growing up, they were that person who like knew it all and shit, right? And they would always try to tell their parent what to do, like, cause they like did, they were smart kids, But when you're like a kid living in a house with, a parent that pays bills and other shit, you cannot like run around and be a like because like you read shit online and you did your little research, Johnny, or whoever you are, Patricia, whoever you are, but you can't like tell me what to do. I'm your dad. I'm taking care of you. You're still a kid, and like that, depending on how they like treated you, made you feel like dumber, but you're actually a smart person. You like to do your research. You like to talk to people, but like they like put their foot down and like told you this and that. But like when you get on your own, it could either come two ways. You're actually excited and you're like, I can finally, talk to who I want to and read the books I want to without people trying to like, restrict me or whatever. Or, you come out and you're like, maybe I'm like really not that smart. Like, people told me I wasn't smart. So, I need to like do this, but you still have that part of you that's like, it thirsts for like knowledge, thirsts for, communication, but you might like limit yourself a little bit because of like how people like treat you, but I also play out that other way where you're like, okay, I'm finally free to move around and talk to who I need to, and make a life that I want. But like you also, you know, get why they did that because you're also a smart person too as a Gemini. You couldn't just run around like a little kid talking to strangers, and like you then take that to your kids, if you end up having them, and you're like, you can't run around and talk to fucking strangers. It's just not what you do. You're a little kid, you're a little girl, a little boy. You'll get your ass whooped if you do that, or whatever the punishment is, you know, you can't just do that, you know, even if you do know this and that, it don't matter, under my house is my rules, and that's how you do, um, but then you might not like want to have kids because, you don't want to be that parent that does that. So then you like, doing your own thing and you still have like, friends and like the friends you connect with, you really, want to see them do better. So like you then, you're still like, you're like, nagging them, it might seem like about shit, and you're just like telling them the facts, out of like, you just want them to know, you know, if you do this, that this is gonna happen, because this and that, because you've done research and you've talked to other people, and you just don't want to see your friend fall, you don't want to see them like fail, and also you you don't want to be like, have that information and you never gave it to them, like knowing that, you could have like helped your friend from like, going down the wrong path, but you ain't gonna let that happen, you know. But and if you had your family around growing up, you like to keep in contact with them. You're the type that like always talks to them, still, sends them messages and other things. You just, do it, either on good terms or bad terms. You either understand that they liked you or they didn't like you. You don't care. You're gonna let them know something. You're gonna get something to them. You're gonna let them know something. And if they don't talk back, that's them. You were giving them, what's going on. So the next person, sun in the fourth house, that is Cancer sun in the fourth house. This person has like emotional, problems, but emotional strength too, emotional tenacity. That means they've been through a lot. So like they then understand that other people, you know, also go through shit. But this person really cares about their family and their roots, their upbringing. You know, let's say this person had both parents in the house. They don't like people who like talk down on their parents. That really ticks them off. It really pisses them off. You know, they don't like people like that. And they don't want to build like a home in the future with people like that. They don't like that. You know, but they like, they were probably one who was like really close to mom and dad. You know, but like they were able to like, see these kids are kind of like, creative a little bit. They are close to mom and dad. You know, not too annoying, but they can be at times. They actually can be fucking annoying at times. But like the way they do things, they're able to like manipulate situations in their favor. And then that like, you know, goes on into their adult life. Them have kids and they can like, get emotionally attached to their kids, and then like, it's almost like a level of control they have over the kids. Um, because they don't want to see their kids, do bad. They don't want any like harm to come to their kids. They'll do anything they can to like protect their kids in that kind of way. Um, and like, it might like lead them to do shit that they, didn't want to do, or they just had to because they had to. They have kids and shit. Um, and they, you know, care about their family. You know, like let's say they, ain't on great terms with certain family members. They still are the one who, wants to like, um, and they still find themselves talking about that shit. See, they these people like to talk about their past too. They like to, remember the bad shit that family members done to them, and good things that they've done. Um, and they meet people in life, um, who like can connect with that type of like trauma or pain that they went through. They could have like had one parent, and they split up and other things. Maybe they didn't have any parents at all, and they lived in foster homes and shit like that. And shit wasn't always great, but like this person still wants to, have some type of, you know, meaningful relationship with somebody. Building a home, building a family. That could look like different things too. It might not necessarily mean having kids, but and if they do want that, they still, if they want that, they have an idea of what that type of family, should like feel like and look like. You know, they also might lie to themselves and be like, this ain't possible. So I'm gonna, do other things. If they do that, then that's fine too. Because they also learn about themselves, and this is when they like leave home and shit. Like, but during childhood, they're typically, cared for, and like they're always asking, mommy, daddy, hey, mommy, daddy, are you okay? And like they show concern for their like parents and shit. That's why their parents like don't get on them as much. Oh, well, little this and that is showing me, you know, care, and that I'm all right. I know that my, kid will be all right one day because, you know, even though I like want to keep them around, they, will be all right. They will find people who, won't take advantage of them. They'll know the bullshit from the like not bullshit. You know, but the next person, this is Leo, sun in the fourth house. This person, so like when they were growing up, they were the ones who got all the attention, in the family. You know, it just seemed like that. They got more attention from mom and dad. They did well. They're loud and they, even annoying at times, but they still seem to get more attention. Um, and then like that builds a level of arrogance in this person, or people love me. They don't love other people. Let's say this person was the only child, maybe. That's definitely true. Then they were like making sure little Johnny or little Erica was all, or whatever, was all right. And then by the time they became adults, they thought they could like basically rule the world. My mom and dad, couldn't, they did this for me. They did everything for me. I would be like, it wouldn't be right for me to not like run my shit on the world, that type of thing. And like, but when they do that, they come across like, challenges and shit. But this person has that confidence though, because both parents were like, you're my son, you're my daughter, you can do this. Now let's say that this person, right, has, siblings. Their siblings might have jealousy towards them. This person can either be smart with their power or not, which means they can still want a relationship with their siblings. And like, it's like, I can't help that mom and dad like me more than you. And then said siblings got to understand that, people are different, but still, they probably might still have some type of, jealousy towards said sibling, no matter what the order is. This person is going to get more, attention and more, time with like their parents. But then when they go to, create things, again, they might, come off as arrogant to some people. So some people don't fuck, because they sound like they, know everything. Their confidence is like so high, they're cocky. But other people like that shit, and like it attracts people. They ain't gonna, keep themselves back, and because like it's kind of like the Aries too. So like, let's say they grew up in a house where they couldn't, like, they got their ass whooped too. They still, like, let's say they got a lot of time with their parents, and like the focal point was on this kid. This kid was still getting their ass whooped or whatever when they did wrong. It wasn't like this kid, and it's not the same. Like, I don't know people's past, but I know different things can happen. When you have parents there and parents not there. This kid got their ass whooped still. So this person's like already not gonna like they understand that they're already like that. They don't have to like over showboat. You know, they don't have to do that. So they're gonna like still attract friends and still have a friend group, and then eventually, if they want to, they can create a house for themselves and do that. And and it comes to them because they're seen, and because this is Leo energy, they're loud and proud. Um, and there's like certain things they like really like, and then there's other things that other people like that they just don't like, so they'll like stay the fuck away from it. And like try to like promote their shit or whatever, right? Um, but like that shit can tick them off. That might be like from their past. They like watching these cartoons as opposed to these type of cartoons, and then other people watch those type of cartoons. They're like, oh, I can't fuck with you now because you like those type of cartoons and not these kind of cartoons. You're not my type of person. Stay away from me. I don't like you. But they'll like let you know and stuff too. But you know, we have Sun and Virgo next for in the fourth house. The Sun, Virgo Sun in the fourth house. This person, um, they were more reserved as a kid. They like to do things, but like when they did things, it was like when they messed up, they like learned their lesson. See, they didn't like to piss their parents off. They like to like do things for their parents. Make sure things were in order at the house. It's like daddy and mommy have certain rules that can't be broken. They're the ones they're like the enforcer and shit. They're like, oh, so and so can't do this. You can't do this, so and so. If you do this, I'm gonna tell mommy and daddy that you did that. To watch their ass so they don't get up, they don't get beat, but also to show I'm listening to you and I respect your authority. This person can be like that. Growing up. But then when it comes to like, growing up and then they become an adult, you know, some people might not fuck with them though because they are, nitpicking everything, but it comes from them being a kid and like not wanting to like they seize an opportunity in a sense, you know, and they're like, I'm reserved. I'm gonna like observe and not do the fucked up shit my brothers and sisters are doing, and I'm actually gonna ask questions, but like these kids are also smart, so they still get their licks too, they still but not as much, so they still get their licks from mommy and daddy too, like they still get their licks, but not enough, because like they know how to like navigate and like they don't want to step on eggshells, but also this person, they know how to like do that shit and like, oh well, you shouldn't have, and they'll tell their siblings like, well, you shouldn't have done that dumb shit. You shouldn't have ran around and hang out with those bad kids because mom and daddy didn't like that, shit like that, and they'll like get, they usually get like beat up on by the other siblings, sometimes, or I don't know, the siblings then follow suit with this, kid who has the sun in Virgo, and they just end up doing that, but probably not, because like different signs and different things and different dynamics. It probably just ain't that, and this kid's just the goody goody of the group, and like doesn't step on it, says show so much, but like at the same time they could get a big head and shit sometimes too, so they do get their licks. So what I'm saying is they're so caught up in, oh well, I'm not getting my ass with that as much, so they start laughing at their brothers and sisters and they start getting on their siblings. And if parents are like paying attention to all their kids, if they are, this kid still gets their licks every once in a while, but typically they like to not step on eggshells and other shit. So then when they get to adulthood, they also don't want to like fuck around as much, because they were also like, if I fuck around, bad things will happen to me. I won't be seen in a like, it ain't like they're looking for, like, this person's not looking, it's not like this person's looking for like the hype necessarily. They just want to be acknowledged for like the good work that they do, or like the fact that they don't fuck around and they stick to a certain plan and other things, because like it's like basically instilled in them to like follow the rules and do things to a T and be like a model citizen of like what what a person should be like. They're basically the people who are looked at as that example, like even when they become adults and shit, and then when they have kids, they're setting like they're setting type of like ground rules that even their parents like might be like, that shit's too much, but you're making your son do this and that and this and that, or your kids this, it's like very specific. You better follow the like specific details or you're getting your ass whipped, or You come home late, like even a minute late, you're gonna get your ass whooped. This person then becomes that type of parent. And then if they don't have kids, which they probably will, maybe, because these people have like that grounded energy, because this is earth sign. But let's say they don't for whatever reason, because these people should have kids, but they don't. They're still gonna build a home for themselves, and like when they have people come through, like, "Yo, you're never coming back here again," and they might even get the answer, from people. If they don't like follow people's, ground rules, this person, and it's like specific things, in the smallest fucking like mistake will like tick them the fuck up. Um, the next person is Sun, Libra Sun in the fourth house. So this person likes to be on good terms with everybody too. Kind of like the Gemini, though, they can, want to talk to everybody. And mommy and daddy don't like that. You are a sweetheart. You can't do shit like that. They'll take you, and this person probably gets their ass whooped because they want to run around and talk too much. They, then learn to, you know, maybe not talk to everyone, but also they still have that about them where they like it's just naturally about them where they want to know what's on somebody's mind. So like it at first it was about let me be friends because like when they're young, like let me be friends with everybody. Hey, do you want to be my friend? Hey, do you want to be my friend? When they're like young and shit, but then they get their ass whooped and like because they start trying to talk to adults and shit like that, and then they learn their lesson and other things. But then they like by the time they're an adult, they're not questioning people to like necessarily become their friend, but out of like, you know, can I like even trust you? They ask us questions and they're able to like, slowly but surely tell if this is going to be a relationship that I just go to like, okay, that's just the acquaintance I know. And they still talk to this person. They still do talk to these people, but like it's not one of those things where they stick around and shit. They're like, oh, I see you, John. That's cool. And then they find their friend, Jimmy, and they like, real buddies and shit. And they actually talk about shit. Um, and they, also early on, they try to like, talk to their parents, right, and other things, use kind words and be cool, and then be like, I've been this way and that, and they try to like, sweet talk their parents. Sometimes it works, sometimes it don't, depending on what it is. But that takes on an adult life, and then other people. I'm not your parent, so like that sweet talking shit ain't gonna work with me. You know, um, and they just can't get through to some people, and then some people they find their friends or whatever. But they like certain people like won't have that sweet talking shit. They just don't like it. They see it as a way of you're trying to manipulate them. You're trying to do this, do that. So people then won't eat cost of that. They're like, that's bullshit. That's you're too good. You're probably lying about something. But they still like seek other people. It's like in them to like want to because this is Libra energy, just to like know and you know know who's around the area and try to like protect themselves by like they'll ask people questions because this is cardinal wind. They ain't gonna like sit idly by, but it like seems like because like they talk to certain people about like making moves, and then but they're talking to everybody else. See, they're trying to get like information from everybody so they like can understand their environment. Um, but the way it seems like sometimes it's like who are they like really fucking loyal to? Because they're running around everywhere. And with the family, I don't know, they might seem that way to the family too. But guess what? If they like actually love their family and shit, they're gonna make sure, no, I like found this out about these people, and they're actually like informants. They like to tell people about what they learned in the area, and then like give that, vital information to the people they love and care for, particularly their family members and like, really close friends that they have. You know, they become like that type of person, and like they're like effective at doing shit like that. I love your pajamas. They're great. They don't like conflict either. They're also like, the ones who try to like quell the conflict within the home, even when they're young, because they don't want that shit to like break the family unit apart. They want to try to keep shit together, so they'll like, jump in and try to be the mediator, and they are good at that. They find themselves later on being that type of, role when they make their own house. No fighting, or if we're gonna fight, we're gonna do it like this. However you parent your kids, man. Um, anyways, the next person is Scorpio, Sun in the fourth house. So the fourth house has to do with emotions, upbringing, and all that. This person is a person who can get fixated on one emotion, and like basically that emotion is intensified because they, can fixate on that one emotion, that emotional feeling, whatever it might be. It could be like anger, it could be sadness, whatever, and they can like do this. This is because, in their past, certain people, their parents, did stuff, they were like lack of support. Um, maybe it was too much support. Um, but like if it was too much support, these people were willing to like, do what they have to for their parents, but these people are water signs, right? So they care about their parents too, if they had their parents there. Like even if their, parents, did them wrong a little bit, but they won't like that part. See, there's one parent they like more than the other one, but they're still able to like the one they like more. They can like kind of manipulate more. This person can, the person that the one that was like there to like give them emotional love when like let's say daddy whooped their ass and shit, and was always like telling them to buzz off, or um, maybe they weren't there, but mommy was and she was cool. He's now, or he or she's now like, I will do anything for my mom. I'll, kill somebody for my mom and shit. You know, my dad, on the other hand, I might not do that for. Or, maybe they will. But, it depends on like what kind of like, importance they put on their past. They might then be like, I'd still, fight for him too, even though he wasn't like, the best, like my best friend, that was my father. He did that ultimately because he didn't want me to, go down the wrong path or hang out with these people. And, I was a kid living in a house. So now, I'd still, fight for him, even though he's, like I definitely don't like him. Like I wouldn't want to like drink or smoke or anything with my father, but I would still fight for him. I would kill for him too. These people end up being like those type of people. Um, and like they're kind of like crybabies though too. They are. But like I don't want to say that though. They are crybabies. Their parents have to like be there for them. If their parents ain't there for them, these people, man, they could hate like a lot of shit. These people can like become real, problems to the world. But like I don't mean in a bad way. sometimes it's a bad thing, but sometimes it ain't. Sometimes they're still. What I'm saying is they're still seeking a deep connection, but the way they're doing it is wrong because they didn't have their parents there. They didn't have all their, because like with Scorpio, they come with a lot of challenges. They face a lot of challenges in life. Because like they'll look at a person and they're like, well, I thought you would understand because you're my dad or you're my mom, but you don't understand. You don't understand my feelings towards this and that. They then leave and they continue to like search for a deep connection, somebody who understands them on a deep level. And they might have expected that shit too much of their parents, and their parents were only there to raise them and like then like get them on their way. But again, they might like care for their parents still and other things. But if they didn't have parents, they could be very toxic people, very chaotic. But it's like their upbringing that made them that way. But they also use that as a manipulative tactic, um, to like make you think they ain't as toxic, and then so you gotta be careful with these people essentially. Um, but they're definitely ruled by certain feelings they have about the past, and like when they come across certain people, they could tick them off, or it could like be a sense of like familiarity. You could either get that violent Scorpio that's not your friend, but that's if you're like pushing them, because again, these are introverts. If you're like you keep poking at it, it'll bite your fucking head off. It's the thing. But if you're like one who like reminds them of comfortable energy, they might want to like they'll be the one to like make sure you're all right, and like do that. Um, you know, they'll be a like really cool friend. Um, and they do like to look for people to like build a home with, and they like to support one another. But you with the Scorpio though, you have to like want to support them too and what they're doing. It's not like I'm gonna pour everything into you and you're not gonna do shit for me. You better be doing that shit like equally, because I'll be out. That's how the Scorpio is. But they'll be hurt by that too if they have to do shit like that. Like it'll be more fuel for that fire. But anyways, um, Sagittarius sun in the fourth house. So this person was also looked at, and like they definitely needed to be looked at by their parents and shit. So basically, Sagittarius sun in the fourth house. They early on were like that kid that would just do shit and like not think about it. Like, god damn, that's my dumbass son who's like running up on people and like trying to act like an adult and like drink alcohol and like you know like just shit that could like get them in like danger and shit. Like, god damn, my kids grabbing snakes, my kids, telling people off, cursing at people, and like this kid got the belt and other things. They like kept doing it anyway, because it's just like this person's high energy. They're energetic. They like to, have fun, and they don't like to wait for shit. They're impatient. So like they also, might feel like their parents were like tying them down too much, at times, but then they grow up and they understand why. I can't do that as a little boy. I'll get my ass whipped. But they also like to tell their parents how it was. So like their parents actually, grew some kind of respect for their kid. Because sometimes, they could sense when their parents were like lying about shit. And they would like, let them know they wouldn't hold anything back, even if they got lasted for it. They would still do that anyways. You know, and like basically like it don't ever stop them, they still, but like what it is like they might not fuck with their parents that much. Like it's like I'm trying to have friends, I'm trying to like live life to the fullest, I'm trying to like do all kind of things. Like they've been kind of like how I described those wind signs earlier. They were held back from like going out on adventures and doing what they want to do when they were children. So like now that they're adults, they're like, ooh, fuck, I can do this shit. you know I can finally do that shit I always wanted to do, not have to worry about you know getting beat down and all that shit. And typically they might not want to have kids, but if they do have kids, they might be more lenient. But then like if it does piss them off, they could like actually like go the fuck off on the kid. See, because this is fire, right? So like this parent, right, is like, most things I can like let you get away with and shit, because I do believe in a little bit of like freedom, a little bit, to like, you mess up, you learn about yourself, that experience, or whatever, but you can't run up on people and be disrespectful, so you get your ass whipped. But like this person will like might take it too far sometimes, and like they know that they could be like that, so they're like they don't even want to have kids. you know so they don't even want to have kids, but this person also is that type of person who likes to like run around and fuck around and experience things, so they probably do end up having kids. But they still, they fight for their kids and shit, man. They definitely fight for their kids. They fight for their friends and other things. They and like when they were growing up and they were talking about their parents and shit, they might have been standing up for like their siblings and shit, because like they knew a little more about the situation than their parents did, you know and they were talking back all because they were trying to, you know, help them out. But this person's, kind of fucking, all right. When it comes to like the people that they care about. But if you're just some guy, probably, not, but you know, when it comes to like their family members and shit, they'll, still, want to, they ain't gonna like, be buddy buddy with them, but they like ultimately understand after growing up that that's what it was. But still, I gotta like do what I was trying to do back then. They wouldn't let me do that shit. They felt like caged in. They're another that's like I cannot fucking feel caged in. You can't tell me to do that shit now. I'm gonna run around and do whatever, and like I won't regret it. But some of them do. It depends on who it is. But when they do have kids, it can kind of be chaotic with this person too, because like they might not, or they know their temper, so like you know they like their kid, but then they also like don't like their kid when they're doing, because they know that they're like their kid's kind of like them, so they'll like lash out and talk back and shit like that, but they won't let that slide. They'll go the fuck off, but sometimes it's like a bit much, because like these people when they get upset they like, because it's fire, remember, it's like not always exciting, but like it explodes like boom. um and like that kid then remembers that too, and other things, but sometimes you gotta do shit like that, so this person doesn't want to do that, but they I don't know, I don't know with these people. But there's people who have kids who are Sagittarius and shit, but they might be too loud and like yell at their kids a lot, and they might not like show their kids a lot of attention because they are still themselves, and they're still like, man, running around doing their shit that they always have done. They kind of never slow the fuck down, but they do slow down, but they're still like trying new things. This next person, right, this person, um Capricorn sun in the fourth house, this person is introverted. They'll do shit for their parents. They actually respect their parents. If they get their ass whooped, whatever. They know that they did wrong, and other things. They'll try to they do, and they all their parents. Now I ain't saying what you think I'm saying. I'm not saying that this individual like agrees with everything their parents say, but they have a respect for their parents. And so like moving forward, they are a certain way because their parents, instilled that in them. But these people are of earth signers, so they like also don't like to be seen in a like, man. They want people to see that they can handle their own shit, like no matter what. And they have discipline, and they try not to fuck around too much. And if they do, they also are still that person. Um, they can be too controlling as a parent, but that's, them being like, ground rules in my house. You can't do this. You'll get your ass whooped. If you talk back, you'll get fucking hurt. These people will bring out the belts on the kids and shit to teach them that lesson, as they've got it, and they like, they would expect their kid to do the same to their kid, so they understand that, kids cannot run around and do whatever the fuck they want. Um, but, this person also, right? I was gonna say something about this individual. So like certain things that their parents instilled in them, don't hang around these type of people. These people are like, not good. Um, if they, talk sideways about their upbringing or whatever, this person might actually get active on you. Typically they don't, because they like to like, again, they like to build too. They like to build their own home for themselves and other things. They focus on their work. But if people keep pecking them and other things, they will get, they'll get the fucking hands from these people. Um, you just don't do that because this person's already, they're on their grind. They're already doing what they have to do for themselves. They're locked in, and even if they ain't locked in, they, have that in them. They want to be a father or a mother for somebody. They want to like, you know, be there to like kick them in the ass and be like, hey man, like why are you doing this? I thought you were, this or that, and like kind of they like to bring people back into reality and shit, you know, and then, maybe that's why they got their ass whooped when they were a kid because they were trying to bring their parents into reality because they actually did, see shit for what it was. They still did because they got one, but, they got their ass whooped because they were a kid at that time. So their parents didn't care about that. Um, so, and like it wasn't like they lacked hard work or anything, but they got kicked, they got their ass kicked and other things by their parents, when they fucked up, and then like they were just like, I gotta be the best human being I can be. I gotta like, I know I can do stuff. I'm gonna do stuff. I'm gonna build, this. I'm gonna be a great worker. I'm gonna be, a person that, people can come to and know that like they ain't gonna be like too goofy or too, whatever. And even if they are, I'm still out of that group of people, the one who's more grounded and sees shit for what it is. And I don't get emotional too much, but like certain things about my past can get me emotional. Like there's just some shit you don't say to me, or like that's when they get like extroverted and they're like, "Oh, hey, you better not say that about me," And like typically they're easier going, or like a person who's like just minding their own business. But then when something happens like that, they're like, "Oh no." Um, because that just ain't right. That ain't how I was raised and shit. So, anyways, the next person is Aquarius Sun in the fourth house. So this person, right? They thirst for knowledge. They have like, they like to get new ideas. They like to, network with friends. Um, they don't like to be held back either. But like, if like their parents, right, have certain ideas about how like, things should be, but this kid or person is like a little bit different and don't believe in what their parents believe, or like they might believe in what their parents believe, but they, um, like certain ideas that their parents have, they don't see it that way, and they try to like give their opinion and shit, did you ever think about this as an idea? They might have grown up in a house where, what I say is what it is, and that shit's wrong. So you're kind of, or daughter, that's not a thing. It's not in this house, that type of thing. So like then they, kind of are like, they still have that about them, but they grow like some type of like, distance from their parents. Um, it's like they distance themselves from them and shit, you know. And then, they keep on, like, when they become adults, they keep on running to find that, the like-minded people that, would always, would actually acknowledge them as like, okay, that sounds like a valid idea, a valid plan. You want to implement that, make it happen, whatever it might be. Um, but like growing up, they felt kind of restrained and shit. So like and then, in like, not in like all aspects, but like they felt like they couldn't like I'll get that added. Think the way they wanted to think, that type of thing, and have those ideas and talk, actually, be a person they want to be, you know. But they like distance themselves from their family and shit if they like more like that, and not supportive of like their children and shit. Let's say they grew up in a family that was supportive of them, they still will be distant from their family members. Why? Not because they don't like their family. They actually love their family. See, this person's actually a person who don't want to do wrong by their family members. I, grew up in a house that actually did was like, if my kid has, something to say, as long as they ain't disrespectful, I'll hear them out. And like, that sounds like a good idea, Johnny, Patricia, we can, make something happen. Um, but then they're also like, I have to like do shit for myself because, I'm the one who like likes to learn shit, likes to, seek new information, likes to connect with new people, and that's still in them, whether their family was like, you know, guarding them, telling them no, 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 and like putting chains on their mind, or like if their, parents were like, no, it's fine to like be different or whatever, but while you're here, it's still kind of like that thing where it's familiar energy, it's not new. They're thirsting for like new knowledge, so like they're gonna go find people who can do that. They don't hate their family, unless it's the other scenario where their parents were like telling them like they don't know shit, they're dumb, they should like never think like that, think like me, think like me, don't think like that. uh, don't over talk to people and shit like that. um this person, it ain't that they're distant from their family, or they're disloyal to their family. They have to find themselves first and live life, and then eventually they'll find their way back. They kind of understand shit like that because then they have grown as a person, and then they can be like, hey, in my life I've learned this, and like I understand you raised me this way, and like these people can still talk to people and shit, you know what I mean? They ain't like aggressive or anything like that. It might be overwhelming, to said, family members. But if they hadn't seen them in a while, they'd be like, well, what the fuck, And this person will, be like, well, I've learned this, I've done this, this and that. Um, and again, they like, and like, let's say they lived in a house where they were the smart ones, so they were smarter than their parents. They don't like stupid people. Um, But like, let's say their parents were also smart, and they're smart like their parents. They still try to find people who are smarter, not people who are dumber. People who like make them stimulate their mind and challenge them to grow mentally. Um, and that's how like this person moves. All right. So the last person is Pisces, Sun in the fourth house. So this person's emotional, right? This person's a little ballsy, though, kind of like Sagittarius, but they are more, clever about shit after they've, tried to do certain things. They've gotten the belt and shit in their life. Like they definitely have probably. But they also are water signs, so they like cry and like, they know how to get on their parents' good side. Because again, they feel what their parents are feeling, whether their parent knows that or not. Um, and like that can rub off on their kid, and then their kid, you know, has problems because their parents rubbed up on them. The shit that they wouldn't tell their kids and shit like that. Like they still felt that, like, oh, my dad was frustrated. My mom was, upset because my dad was like this. They felt all that shit. They ain't always like loud and shit, these kids. But then they would like try to like find like positive energy, shit that made them feel better. But then because they tried to find that energy, they were living in a house where, again, hey, son, you can't do that. You'll get your ass whooped. You know, so then, it turned them into, you know, people who, didn't like that type of treatment. And then they found other people, they, and they still like keep that about them, in their adult life. They can still like feel, other people's emotions and other things, but they like, basically how other people make them feel. Like they can stand in somebody's presence and already know if this person's like worth, being around or not. That's what I mean by this person. And like if they're around this person too long, they're like, I don't know, I don't want to fucking be around it because they, they just make me feel like I don't feel comfortable around. You know, and they know this shit. They can pick up on it. But like early on, they were forced to live in a house and shit, right? Because they're, a kid and other things, right? So they couldn't, have that. But let's say this person was like as longing for, that type of energy, a father or mother, type of energy, because they lived with one parent or whatever. So then they're gonna seek that type of energy in like somebody else, and sometimes it, like, you know, they might be exuding certain traits, but it's not right. And then like, so they can grow as a person because this person believes in growth and development for themselves too, and they seize opportunities, you know, they can like, with the opposite sex and other everything else, right? They know if like, this person is down to, fuck around with that or not, or if they can like, make that shit happen. But that's just part of it. If they're like trying to find friends and shit, right? They know if this person's this way or that way. But also, with that, it was their parents that made them that way. So like, even if they like don't realize that, oh well, this person's bad because this and that, and now I feel that energy coming off of them. They definitely ain't a good person. But maybe that person was just going through something at that time, and they're actually not. But they learn and they, either, but they also like will, fuck around with them for a little bit to see if they are, and they either find out that this person that they're trying to fuck around with or be friends with is cool, and they were just going through it or whatever, or like they're actually, always toxic, and they will know because of how they feel around this person, and like, oh shit, like this person's really fucked up. I should have never, allowed my energy to go towards this person. But being a person like this, and like this person also with their, like, family, and they're like, yo, are you feeling all right today? They like to like, ask them that shit if they sense anything's off, like, dad, mom, are you all right? Are you okay? You know, they like to like, because they can already, they know if like, something's up. It's like subtle things. You might be putting on a smile and shit, but they know that something's up. And maybe people didn't like them for that, but ultimately they respected them for it, and they did like them for it because you can't hide that shit from your brother, you can't hide that shit from your son, you can't hide that shit from your daughter who like knows you and shit like that. And then when they find, the person they're supposed to be with, or like, whatever, they're like, hey, you can't hide shit from me. I know, and other things, but that comes with time and energy, right? Um, but these people are, you know, past driven as well, so they could get ticked off from like the littlest things that people say about past related things. They can like go from being in a positive state to being in a negative state, um, and then like it's felt throughout everything, because like these water signs, and Pisces too, because this is mutable water, so they they have the ability to change another's emotions by like being in their presence, either for the better or for the not, and maybe their parents saw them as like a weirdo who like this, like my son makes me feel weird, I don't like him, or my daughter does, so I don't like him, so then like they have a fucked up like feeling about themselves, like I'm not enough, and then they try to be on some like hero shit because they're like, their parents weren't like that, like they're still searching for an emotional connection with somebody, an important one, so they keep finding people and shit. They sometimes find the wrong people, but they learn from their mistakes and shit. These people eventually gain what's called wisdom, but um this was the fourth house. Sun in the fourth house is told by dear Spirit Andrew. I'll have, the moon in the fourth house next week. So be cool on the corner and wait for that video to come out as well.